The strange thing about being invisible, Daniel Carter once said quietly to himself, is that people only notice you the moment you decide to walk away. Daniel had always believed that most people only understood value after it was gone, but the day he watched The Office finally realize what Emily Harper meant to them, he understood that truth more deeply than ever before. For nearly 6 years, Emily Harper had worked on the third floor of a modest marketing firm in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place with beige carpet, humming fluorescent lights, and a coffee machine that always sounded like it was working harder than anyone in the building. Daniel had a desk across the aisle from hers, about 10 feet away, close enough to hear the quiet rhythm of her keyboard every morning at exactly 8:05 a.m., while most people arrived closer to 8:30. She was never loud, never dramatic, never the kind of employee whose voice filled the conference room, and yet somehow almost every project that succeeded had passed through her hands at some point. Daniel noticed things quietly. He saw Emily fixing formatting mistakes in presentations that managers later proudly presented as their own work. He saw her stay 20 minutes after everyone else left just to make sure the shared client database was updated so the next morning would run smoothly. He saw her bring homemade muffins once a month and leave them in the break room without saying they were hers. And strangely enough, most people never connected the dots. To them, Emily was simply nice Emily, the quiet one who always seemed available when something needed fixing. If someone forgot a deadline, Emily would help. If someone struggled with a spreadsheet, Emily would figure it out. If a client called with a confusing question, Emily somehow had the answer. Daniel often wondered how many people realized how much invisible weight she carried for that office. Apparently, the answer was almost none. The management team loved numbers, charts, and flashy presentations, but the quiet consistency that kept everything running rarely appeared on performance dashboards. That perfectly captured the problem. 2 supervisors were standing near the printer talking about an upcoming client pitch worth nearly $200,000 a year. One of them said they needed someone to organize the background research, and the other casually replied, "Just give it to Emily. She's good at that stuff." Not once did they mention that the entire structure of their last successful campaign had originally come from Emily's research. Daniel looked over at her desk at that moment. She simply nodded politely when the assignment landed on her inbox, opened a new document, and started working without complaint. That was the pattern. Work appeared. Emily solved it. Credit floated somewhere else. Months passed like that, quiet and steady. Then one morning, everything changed in a way nobody expected. Daniel arrived at the office at 8:20 a.m. and noticed something unusual immediately. Emily's desk lamp was off. Her chair was neatly pushed in. Her keyboard was covered with a small note-sized envelope. Daniel felt a that tells you something is different before anyone explains it. At 9:10 a.m., the office manager gathered everyone into the conference room. Daniel sat near the back, while people murmured about schedules and deadlines. The manager cleared his throat and announced that Emily Harper had accepted a new position at a consulting firm in Denver, and that her last day had actually been the previous Friday. A soft ripple of surprise moved across the room. Some people looked confused. Others looked mildly inconvenienced. One supervisor immediately asked who would take over Emily's project queue. Daniel noticed something interesting, though. For the first time since he had worked there, nobody immediately had an answer. At first, the change seemed small. A few shared documents needed updating. A few client notes were harder to find. The office simply redistributed tasks and continued forward. But by the second week, subtle cracks began appearing. A marketing report contained outdated statistics because the person responsible hadn't realized Emily had always double-checked them. One noticed that Emily used to quietly send reminders the evening before. The shared database slowly filled with inconsistencies because nobody had the habit of cleaning it every afternoon. By week 3, the problems were impossible to ignore. A presentation for a major client meeting started 20 minutes late because key background information couldn't be located quickly. The room felt tense as managers flipped through incomplete notes. Daniel sat there silently thinking about the hundreds of invisible corrections Emily had once made before those meetings even began. Then came the moment that changed everything. The company had scheduled an important strategy session for a new national retail client. The contract could potentially expand the firm's annual revenue by nearly 30%. Daniel watched as the team struggled to piece together research, market comparisons, and campaign structure. Files were scattered across folders. Data conflicted. Charts lack context. After nearly an hour of confusion, someone found nobody had wanted to admit. Emily used to organize all of this. The room went quiet. Another manager added slowly. She also summarized competitor campaigns. Someone else mentioned she maintained the performance metrics spreadsheet. One by one, people began listing tasks they suddenly realized Emily had handled without announcement. Daniel counted at least 12 responsibilities mentioned in the next 5 minutes, each one previously assumed to be handled somewhere else. The truth slowly formed like a picture coming into focus. Emily had never just been helpful. She had been the invisible structure supporting nearly everything they did. Without her, the office felt like a building missing quiet beams behind the walls. Over the next month, the company attempted to rebuild the system Emily had quietly maintained. 2 employees were assigned to replace her responsibilities. A new workflow document appeared on the internal server explaining tasks that had never needed explaining before. Even then, the process felt. Daniel sometimes imagined Emily in Denver, perhaps sitting near a window in a brighter office with mountain sunlight touching the desk, working somewhere people actually recognized what she contributed. One Friday afternoon, about 6 weeks after her departure, Daniel found the small envelope that had once sat on Emily's keyboard. It had been tucked into a drawer of shared office supplies. Curious, he opened it and discovered a simple note written in calm handwriting. It read, "To whoever sits here next, remember that small things done consistently create the biggest results. Most people won't notice them every day, but one day they will." Daniel folded the note slowly and looked around the office. People were working harder now, but the room still carried a quiet lesson that had arrived too late. He leaned back in his chair and thought about the strange way value reveals itself in life. Sometimes people spend years walking past something precious simply because it works quietly in the background, and only when that quietness finally become visible. Daniel realized then that Emily had never been invisible at all. The truth was simpler and a little uncomfortable. Everyone had simply been too busy looking for loud success to notice quiet excellence. That afternoon, Daniel opened his email and wrote a short message to Emily. He told her the office was learning a lot about the system she had built and that many people were finally realizing how much she had done. He ended the message with a single line that felt honest. "The moment you left," he wrote, "was the moment everyone finally saw your value." A few hours later, Emily replied with a warm and simple response thanking him and wishing everyone well. Daniel smiled at the screen and thought about something important. In a world where many people chase attention, recognition often arrives for the ones who never asked for it. And sometimes the clearest proof of someone's worth is not the noise they make while they are present, but the silence that appears when they are gone. If there is one lesson Daniel carried from that experience, it's life while they are still standing beside you. Because waiting until they leave to recognize their value is one of the most common regrets people quietly carry. And if this story made you think of someone who works quietly, supports others, and rarely receives the credit they deserve, maybe today is the perfect day to let them know that their effort is seen, their work matters, and their value was never invisible.